Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open for the House to battle on the belief that politicization of education is inevitable. To dissect this motion in detail, can I invite Anirudh Mathur from the London School of Economics? The floor is yours.
So to make the first point, what do we mean by education? We want to focus on formal education because we think that this is what the motion strikes to the core of. We want to look at how our schools and colleges have been shaped and sometimes warped by the politicization that has been prevalent around the world across time and space and will always continue to remain. Secondly, looking at the partisan political control of education that has always existed, let me start with a couple of lines. तालीम जो दी जाती है हमें, उफ, वो क्या है? फ़क़्त बाज़ारी है. जो अक़ल सिखाई जाती है हमें, उफ, वो क्या है? फ़क़्त सरकारी है. This loosely translates as this education that is given to us. What is it? Only what the market demands. This intelligence that is taught to us. What is it? Only what the government commands. Now, these two lines weren't written by striking students at FTII in protest of Gajendra Chauhan being parachuted into their institution, nor by the students of the Honorable Vice-Chancellor's institution presidency, complaining about the neoliberalization of their curriculum. Instead, they were written over 100 years ago by Akbar Allahabadi. And one thing I think these two words show, ladies and gentlemen, is the resilience of politicization across both time and space, across history and location. The truth is that politicization is so deeply embedded, it won't be got rid of now. So first, let me look at some examples of this before showing you why it is so fundamentally important, so deeply embedded that it won't be gotten rid of. Let's start halfway around the world, in Britain, where the Conservative government have rewritten the history education to glorify the history of the United Kingdom as some sort of benevolent patrician on the global stage, sweeping under the carpets the atrocities of empire and various wars around the world, and instead simply focusing on the spirit that emerged at the time of World War II. Why is this politicization? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is done to distract the populace from the other issues and unite them under one common banner of one nation, to distract from the growing inequality that plagues the country and shape the next generation to think of themselves as the inheritors of a broadly conservative legacy. And this obviously has the benefit of embedding that ideology and strengthening the party in young, fresh, and more impressionable minds. But we don't need to look so far away. Let's look at this city itself. In Calcutta, we have seen that often a professor needs permission to even draw a cartoon. Now, this sort of politicization doesn't just stop at the present day. When we go a little bit back and look at the CPM, who packed their colleges full of their own cadre, such that the only way students of political science exams could get marks was by citing Marx. Karl Marx. It might seem obvious that politicization of education happens across the world and across history in these humanities and social sciences. But let's look at a slightly more difficult example of maths. Now, how can maths be politicized? How can 2 + 2 = 4 be politicized? Well, it's a lot more subtle than that, and it's a lot more insidious than that. So let me look at the example of America, which my colleagues will build upon later, where in the 1980s, as the upsurge of right-wing, rational choice, individualism grew, maths courses were meant to reshape young people into consumers rather than citizens, equipping them with the skills of accounting, to do taxes, instead of just the pure abstract mathematics that is more commonly found, that encourages critical thinking, reflection, and questioning of established rules. Political control will always remain. Why? Because the funding management of institutions will always remain in political hands. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to propose this motion.
And countering Anirudh, Mr. Manishankar Iyer, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Anirudh for having made my task that much easier by actually arguing my point of view. The fact of the matter is that the word politics and policy have a similar root. And by narrowly defining politicization as party politicization, he has contradicted the main point that he made, which was that education has demonstrated resilience through history and location. It is part of the process of education to be able to encounter arguments that are opposite one to the other, and then to individually make up one's mind as to which side one would either opt for or lean towards. And that does not amount to the politicization of education. It amounts to absorbing the liberal values on which all useful education is based. Yes, there has to be funding because there has to be a policy on education. But forming a policy on education does not necessarily mean imposing it on everybody, because perhaps it is the consumers of this policy, the students themselves, who are most active in opposing any attempt at imposing uniformity on them. But a government that exists which shies away from making policy because it is frightened of being accused of politicization would be an irresponsible government. Merely because there are policy makers, it doesn't mean that therefore they are partisan. Yes, your view arises from an ideology or at least an inclination. And that will, of course, determine the orientation of the policy that you make. But so long as the atmosphere permits others within the same system, that is, members of other political parties, members of other persuasions, to argue against this, it means you have a lively democracy and not the politicization in the pejorative sense of education or any other sector of human activity. The fact of the matter is that if David Cameron is attempting to rewrite history, here we have this young Indian challenging him on the grounds that he is rewriting history in a manner which is not in keeping with the truth. Well, that's what education is about. And I can't, while Cameron has the duty to try to make education in the United Kingdom conform to his idea of what needs to be taught, there is nothing in the system that prevents others from challenging that idea or wanting to put in place an alternative policy. And placing alternative policies or alternative points of view or even alternative prejudices before the people does not amount to the politicization of education. It amounts to the realization of the objectives for which you get educated. So therefore, I'm grateful to him that he believes that politicization of education in Calcutta is inevitable because the CPIM thought it was inevitable. Despite the best efforts of the CPIM to give a particular twist to education in Presidency University, among other places, they failed. There is nothing inevitable about politicization of a deeply prejudiced kind because it will be challenged, except perhaps in the Soviet Union or in Hitler's Germany. In a normal, liberal, democratic space, it is always possible to think differently. I see that my friend Safiul Haq has come in from Pakistan. It's my favorite country. And I know it is a country where there was a desperate attempt made by the rulers of that country from time to time to impose a particular point of view about India in particular on the minds of Pakistanis. But it's not taken. The number of Pakistanis who do not conform to the mullah ideal is much larger than the number who do. And that proves that even the most politicized attempt to politicize education is inevitably doomed to failure. Politicization, in the best sense of the term, means placing forward in the polity a proposition which by the nature of that polity is going to be debated, is going to be challenged, is going to be rethought. And in those circumstances, even if mathematics attempts to create accountants rather than citizens, Anirudh Mathur himself is an excellent example of how mathematics can make for good citizens. The fact of the matter is that policy will always remain, and politicization viewed as policy making is different to politicization simply as partisan politics aimed, as in our parliament it usually is, at proving the other guy wrong, even if he's right.
Now it's our turn to see whether offense is the best form of defense. And to take batting to new heights, we have Daniel Bergman from the University of Oxford.
Okay, this evening began with an explication of the etymology of the word debate. Following the challenge from the last speaker that we're misunderstanding what politics, policy, or politicization are, I thought I should begin with the etymology of the word politics. It comes, as some of you might know, from the Greek prefix poly, meaning many, and the word ticks, meaning blood-sucking creatures. But while we on this side, on the proposition side of the House, contend that politicization is inevitable, we do not, have not, and will not contend that it is inevitably bad. Instead, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the thing to be aware of, the lesson that needs to be learnt, is that politicization is inevitable, and therefore the awareness of that politicization is what we need in our education system, what we need in our society. Well, first of all, it's for the simple logical reason that when you write a curriculum, you have to make some choices. You have to choose which things will be on that curriculum. Because imagine trying to teach everything. Imagine in your school day learning algebra, learning programming, learning how to milk a cow, learning how to speak Portuguese, and learning how to make arguments in a debate. You have to make some choices. So maybe you say, maybe what we should teach is what we think will be most valuable to adult life, what is objectively useful. But in fact, if you ponder on the question of what an adult life should look like, what kind of world, what kind of citizens we expect the graduates of our schools and universities to become, you come to the conclusion, you inevitably come to that conclusion, that that itself is a political question. That itself is a question of politics, and that when we make a judgment as to the answer of that question, we are making a political judgment. Anna had already talked to you about the consequences of making that decision in the realm of history, when certain topics are simply not mentioned on history curricula. He talked about mathematics, the subject that I teach, which is designed, politically designed, to construct consumers, to construct happy and obedient taxpayers. Now, it may be that that's okay. We don't contend that everything here is bad, but you should be aware that that is a constructed and chosen decision. We might look at the question of language education.